Welcome everyone to the Q&A session for our upcoming course, Tibetan Dream Yoga, the 7-week journey to explore a path of lucidity, liberation, and expanded awareness. I'm Lisa Bunnies, and I'll be hosting this Q&A call for the Shift Network, where we'll explore the teachings of Andrew Holecek and address questions about his upcoming 7-week course, Tibetan Dream Yoga, which begins Monday, December 4th. Later, I'll explain how you can participate in this course, even if you can't attend the live sessions. But first, I want to introduce our guest. Andrew Holecek is an author and spiritual teacher who offers talks, online courses, and workshops in the U.S. and abroad. As a longtime student of Buddhism, he frequently presents this tradition from a contemporary perspective, blending the ancient wisdom of the East with modern knowledge from the West. Known as an expert on lucid dreaming and the Tibetan yogas of sleep and dream, he's an experienced guide for students drawn to those powerful nocturnal practices. He's the author of several books, including The Power and the Pain, Transforming Spiritual Hardship into Joy, and the audio program Dream Yoga, the Tibetan Path of Awakening Through Lucid Dreaming. In just a few minutes, we're going to take your questions, but first, I want to welcome Andrew, who will begin our call by leading us in an opening meditation. Welcome, Andrew. It's such a pleasure to talk to you today.
Hey, Lisa, great to be with you. Great to be with our audience as well. So I very much look forward to this next hour of exploring what these nocturnal meditations are all about and what they might be able to do for us. So yeah, I think as we discussed, it might be helpful for just the next minute or so for our listeners and for ourselves to just drop into the present moment by dropping into our bodies and working ever so briefly with a meditation that's called shamatha in Sanskrit, actually literally the practice of tranquility or peace. And so with your eyes open or closed, the invitation is to simply pay a very gentle and yet precise attention to the natural movement of your breath. And to actually notice how it is that whenever a thought arises or an image, anticipation, regret, doesn't matter. When anything arises in our mind and captures our attention, steals our awareness, it's truly a brief instance of non-lucidity. We've lost ourselves in thought. So we can find ourselves by coming back to our body and our breath, coming back to this present moment of awareness, which, as we'll see in this course, is in fact the daily practice of lucidity. This is what it means to be lucid in the larger sense of that word. Okay. These meditation sessions don't have to be very long. My teacher, Khenpo Rinpoche, often talked about what he referred to as a one breath meditation session, which is bringing your full awareness, your full lucidity to one simple exhalation and inhalation, and then just dropping it. That 1 minute, 1 moment, one breath meditation is just as valuable as longer extended periods of practice. So I think with this temporary fleeting grounding, Lisa, if we want to start to explore some of our questions, let's do it.
All right, great, thanks. So, for those of you watching, we have the rest of our time together to dive into your questions for Andrew as we prepare for his upcoming course. Again, that's called Tibetan Dream Yoga, and it begins Monday, December 4th. And if you want to check out the website and learn more about this 7-week course, you can visit dreamyogacourse.com, 3 words, no spaces, dreamyogacourse.com to see the full description. So let's go ahead and get started with questions. If you have a question for Andrew, you can go ahead and type it into that little chat box, and I'll be ready to read them out loud to Andrew. And in the meantime, we actually have several questions waiting for us, so let's go ahead and dive in. Our first question comes from Paul, and I think this is a good way to start. Paul says, would you tell us how to more deeply access that teetering point between our relaxed alpha and dreamy theta state for awareness and remembering?
Yeah, nice. Brings in a little bit of the science. Yeah, of course, this is a marvelous question that has applicability not only to these nocturnal meditations and how we transition from daily waking consciousness into the dream state, but also, as your question, Paul, might suggest, how we, especially if you're a meditator and you practice meditation for any duration, how we can dip in and out of waking consciousness through these kind of pre-dream states and then into, in fact, brief dream states. And so, as you probably know, Paul, these states are called hypnagogic, which is a lovely term. Hypnos is the god of sleep. Gogia means leading towards. So the kind of the descent into dream and sleep occurs through 4 stages of hypnagogic kind of process. And in the practice of lucid dreaming and dream yoga, not only do we bring about lucidity in the overt dream state, but we can practice lucid dream and lucid sleep onset by bringing a sense of heightened awareness. And remember that lucidity really is a code word for awareness. A lucid dream is an aware dream. And so I think this is really important to interject because in the larger scheme of things, what we're doing here, and this is one of the things that parenthetically differentiates dream yoga from lucid dreaming, is the scope of dream yoga is very vast. It's just not what happens in your dreams. It basically includes anything that happens in the darkness of the night. And as we will see in this course, really the darkness of the unconscious mind. So its scope is quite a bit larger than kind of classic lucid dreaming. But specifically that when we engage during the day with a diurnal practice of lucidity, which I so briefly introduced here, this practice of shamatha, quiescence, tranquility, we quite literally are practicing lucidity in the waking state. And as we become more refined with our awareness, more subtle, we can maintain awareness as we descend, as you suggested in your question, this kind of downshifting that takes place as we go from full-blown waking consciousness all the way down to pre-sleep theta, all the way down into deep sleep delta. And with increased lucidity cultivated during the day, we can maintain a heightened sense of awareness as we descend through these states, bring some of these kind of bobbing states in our meditation onto the path of awakening so that they are no longer seen as distractions, but we can actually work with them in our meditation as we start to doze off. And then very specifically in the context of nocturnal practice, bring this heightened awareness as we descend. So it's a great question. This is a brief response to it, but fundamentally it's about working with a heightened receptivity, sensitivity, awareness to the contents of our mind during the day, watching these contents kind of diminish or decrescendo as we drop through the hypnagogic states. And then as we'll discuss in the course, if we can do this with some facility, we can develop the proficiency of what's called a waking-induced lucid dream, the acronym of which is literally WILD. And it's, I think, an appropriate one because you can go from waking consciousness through the pre-dream state, these 4 stages of the hypnagogic space, and then maintain lucidity in the dream state and literally watch a thought from waking consciousness kind of inflate or transform into a dream before your very eyes. It's an incredibly fascinating way to see how it is that we create in the dreamscape, we create our reality, sometimes referred to as lucid solipsism. We create our reality in the dream. And it helps us see how we help color. We don't create the so-called external phenomenal world, but we co-create it. We can color it. And so your question is something we'll unpack in the course as we discuss, I think, with a little bit more rigor, these 4 stages of the descent, the 4 stages of sleep, actually 5, and the associated brainwave frequencies that you referred to. So thank you, Paul, for your question.
Well, thank you for your answer. Let's go to a question from Mike, who says, I often have dreams where something negative is happening to me, and I'm able to wake myself up. Can you please explain this phenomenon, and how does it relate to lucid dreaming, if at all?
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. Well, it depends, Mike, on if you're referring to waking yourself up from the dream, which is, I think, what you're saying, or actually waking yourself up to the dream, which would be using a so-called negative experience to trigger lucidity. And parenthetically, this is what's called a dream-induced lucid dream, technically speaking. So you use something within the dream to wake you up within it. And so what is happening here that your question, Mike, suggests is that, in fact, there is some moment of lucidity taking place. There is some moment of awareness in a negative experience in the dream state that clues you into the fact that you're dreaming. So it may not be a full-blown lucid dream, because when you have that experience, you're bumping yourself out of the dreaming state, and probably as a way to escape that particular experience back into so-called waking consciousness. But the idea is that there is a sliver of lucidity. There's some level of recognition, some level of awareness taking place that is giving you the option, the power in this case, to basically wake yourself out of that state of consciousness and into this. And so as we discuss in the course, using what are called dream signs and even nightmares, we can sensitize ourselves to these types of states and a host of others, so that when they actually come about, instead of waking up out of them, we can wake up within them. And this is really where it gets interesting, because instead of fleeing from the negative state, which most of us do, that particular relationship, one of aversion, tends to keep that negativity alive. We haven't processed it. We haven't digested it. We haven't metabolized it. So it's still kind of waking for us in the subliminal bandwidth of the unconscious mind. But if we can use these states to wake up within them, and realizing that the contents of our mind are fundamentally completely safe, and this is a large charter of what I try to accomplish in this course, is that our minds are basically good. They're even more than that. They're fundamentally pure and actually divine. And if we understand the nature of this inherent divinity, when it cloaks itself in what we attribute to be negative states, we won't be swept away by that, because we realize there's something deeper, truer than the negativity. And so what we can do then is we wake up within that state. Instead of running from it, which just keeps it alive, we reverse our relationship to it. We're invited to do that because the strength of our lucidity gives us the confidence to do so. And then we integrate, we individuate, use a Jungian term, we integrate that usually rejected aspect that we label as negative. We can come to embrace it. We can, and therefore, heal it, whole it. And in this kind of holistic enterprise, gradually start to purify, both in psychological and even spiritual terms, these negative propensities. And this is something you can see in the course of your progress in these nocturnal practices, because the moniker for dream yoga is the measure of the path. It's a very compelling moniker, and it shows us, and Western psychology has said this since Freud, that we can mark a lot of our psychospiritual progress by what happens in the content of our dreams. And so with progress in these practices, as your bad habits, your karma, your neuroses, your negativities are naturally purified through these practices, you will find these negatives becoming less and less. Nightmares eventually gradually diminish and disappear altogether. And you start to realize the foundational goodness of what constitutes the entirety of your heart and mind. So thanks for the question. I hope it helps.
Okay, great. Thanks. In fact, we've got a follow-up question here from Beth, who wants to know, what about those times when you're having a negative dream and cannot wake yourself up? And I can even relate to this, where you're dreaming, this is horrible, there's somebody in the bed next to you who can wake you up, and you try screaming and you can't scream, and then the person next to you says, well, you were making this weird moaning sound. What's that all about?
Yeah. Well, again, I'd have to ask Beth a couple questions, but what you're bringing in here, Lisa, that could be what Beth is talking about. I'm not entirely sure. is a really compelling state of consciousness, or state of sleep that's called sleep atonia or sleep paralysis. It's a very interesting state. It's nature's way of defending us from ourselves. In other words, when you're in rapid movement, eye movement sleep, REM sleep, that's when we're dreaming, your body is frozen. All the voluntary muscles are actually paralyzed. And it is, in fact, to keep yourself from hurting yourself and others. And so what can happen sometimes is you can have an out-of-phase sleep sequence where you're partially conscious in this atonia when you're not supposed to be. And I think this may be a little bit different from what Beth is saying, but parenthetically, Lisa, to address your interjection, it's a really interesting space that if we're not familiar with, it can be quite frightening, even disconcerting. But if we are aware of it, it's usually that sense you feel like you're in a straitjacket, you're trying to cry out, you're moaning, but you can't cry out, again, because your muscles are paralyzed. This is a completely normal space. And in fact, in certain rare instances, people suffer from what's called REM behavioral sleep disorder, which is where this paralysis doesn't work. And they do not so great things like beat up sleeping partners and even kill people, which makes for very interesting litigation. But the idea is, again, if you bring awareness, if you bring lucidity to this process and you have this out of phase sequencing, instead of panicking and freaking out, you realize, oh, I'm experiencing sleep paralysis. You can relax into it without panicking. But maybe Beth is asking something different. I'm not sure. And that is that, from what I gleaned from her question, is that if you are in a negative space and you can't wake yourself up from it, well, this is in fact one reason why people may be interested in pursuing these nocturnal practices, because if you do not become lucid to the contents of your mind, and that's really all dreams are, it's just mental, mostly unconscious, subconscious expressions of our mind. If we don't become aware or lucid to these contents, they control us. Our bad habits, our karma controls us. And it's not often a very comfortable experience. And so I guess my response, if this is what Beth is in fact asking, is that this is one reason why we may be compelled to work with these nocturnal practices, so that in fact we can become lucid when these states arise. We don't have to run from them. We don't have to fear them. We can use these states indeed as avenues for psychospiritual development and awakening. So somewhere between those two responses, maybe I have addressed Beth's question, hopefully.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Beth, if not, go ahead and send a follow-up on the webcast there. In the meantime, let's take a question from Jera, who says, why are dreams so hard to think about and remember?
Yeah. These are good questions. Well, the think about part, I'm not, again, entirely sure. Is it Jera that's you're referring to?
Yes.
But there's an evolutionary reason why dreams dissolve very, very quickly upon awakening. Everybody knows this, that unless you kind of replay the dream, and this is a wonderful practice that we introduce in the course, how to go back and recapture snippets of the dream that can increase your levels of dream recall. Unless we actively do that, within a few minutes max, the vast majority of your dreams are just erased. And scientists conjecture that one of the reasons this is that it is important for the brain and obviously our conscious mind to be able to differentiate from what we've dreamt, and what we call so-called waking reality. Because if you conflate those two, which parenthetically at the highest stages of spiritual development is something we actually aspire to do, to see that there's fundamentally no difference. But that, I think, is a little bit outside the scope of this question. If we're unable to differentiate our dreams from waking reality, then that superposition of dreaming to waking can be quite dangerous. And so evolutionary psychologists and the like have said that dreams are erased rather quickly for just that purpose, that we could get in evolutionary trouble, so to speak, to the extent that you could lose your life if you're conflating a waking experience to a daytime experience. So yeah, these are great questions. Hopefully I'm getting them a little bit.
Well, these are great answers. Thank you. Wow. I'm going to have to listen to this again when I can really focus on what you're saying. Meantime, Kim, I believe Kim is referring to the conversation that you had with Stephen Dinan.
Oh yeah.
The question is, I believe it was mentioned that lucid dreaming or dream yoga can assist with clearing karma. Can it also
Mhm.
create it?
Yeah, for sure. God, these are great questions, guys. Take the course. We're gonna have so much fun together. If these questions continue, this is going to be a rocking course. Yes, you definitely can create karma in a dream. Again, karma is just Eastern word for causality, for fundamentally habit. Karma is just habit. And this is one of the things that is not overtly marketed or touted in the lucid dreaming literature. And I say this somewhat tongue in cheek, but it's so true. They say, fulfill your wildest fantasies within the sanctuary of your own mind. Have an erotic encounter with a movie star, do whatever the heck you want. Yes, that is, in fact, you do have that prowess in the world of lucid dreaming. But what isn't inserted in most of the classic lucid dreaming marketing schemas is that whenever intention is involved, even at the level of a dream, karma is created, habit is created. In other words, dreams are not karmically tax free. And so you may be having a great time in your indulged lucid dream, but again, this is where it's so interesting, using this with the tenets of Western science and what I briefly mentioned with Stephen, one of the classic discoveries of neuroscience of neuroplasticity, which is incredibly helpful in this program. In other words, that what you do with your mind, even in the dream state, affects your brain. What you do with your brain can affect your body. It's called downward causation. And so, to zip the answer down, for sure, this is what differentiates dream yoga from lucid dreaming, at least the way I define it, is that instead of creating bad karma in your lucid dreams, with dream yoga, you use the medium of the dreamscape to create good karma, good habits that then start to pop up in your waking state. And then at the highest stages, to purify habit, to purify karma altogether. And it's only the Buddhas, only the awakened ones from any tradition that are really habit free, that are karmically free. And so until we erase these negative habitual patterns, we're run by them. I mean, the unconscious mind, which is where most of these bad habits reside, they dictate most of so-called conscious experience. Backstage always runs on stage. And so, Kim, the great gift of these practices is, in fact, you can practice in the medium of the night, um, indeed, in a more efficacious manner, because you're working with these deep strata of your being, and you can install positive pop-ups or create good karma. And in the stages of dream yoga that I go through in the course, we talk about exactly what you do when you wake up and how this does create good habits, good karma. And then eventually, as I alluded to earlier, at stages 8 and 9, you learn how to erase habit or karma altogether. So that is a terrific question. And in many ways, it is one of the central discriminating or differentiating aspects between lucid dreaming and dream yoga. So thank you for that.
Okay, great, thanks. Here is a question from Carissa, who says, how do we know that the Buddha or Tara we encounter in the dream is in fact not just a projection of our mind?
Right.
And likewise, how do we know that the Buddha or Taras we see in the Bardo are truly the Buddha and are truly the Tara?
Yeah, another great question. Very difficult to differentiate. And your question, if I can backpedal just a second, your question actually begs a really interesting comment here, in that, yes, according to these teachings, at the deepest levels of the mind, and Carl Jung intimated this with his teachings on the collective unconscious, the spiritual doctrines of the mystical traditions, I think, go even deeper to say that the farther down the rabbit hole you go, the more collective the experience becomes, and the more the mind actually enters what I refer to as the public domain. And what this therefore suggests is that this kind of increased porosity, transparency that occurs, especially with these practices, do in fact allow for the infiltration of wisdom forces, whether it's Tara, the Buddha. These are all cross-dressers, in my opinion. Whether it's Christ, it doesn't really matter to me. In my worldview and understanding, as articulated by these Eastern contemplative traditions, these bandwidths of the deeper mind, in fact, allow for this type of infiltration. And we can, in fact, receive fantastic dreams from seemingly outside sources. But as your question suggests, and it's a really interesting insight on your part, we can also have dreams from within the bandwidth of our own individual spectrum of mind, whereas wherein a particular insight might be clothed in the appearance of Tara or the Buddha, coming within our own particular mind stream. And how we can actually separate those two is not such a simple thing. On one level, really, for me, Carissa, the message is what's important, not the messenger. But yet the phenomenology is also really compelling. It really does mean to me that the more open I become to myself, the more transparent, translucent I become to myself through my daily meditations, and especially with these nocturnal practices, the more I make myself available for these types of dreams. They're in the Bund tradition, they're referred to as dreams of clarity. The Buddhists have their own articulation of this. So for sure, you can have these. In fact, you can incubate a dream. And I did this, I write about it in my first book. In my 3-year retreat, when we lost our meditation master, I was able to, because I had a strong relationship to lucidity, I was actually able to incubate dreams and specifically ask within the context of a fully lucid dream from someone like, you may know this name, His Holiness Karmapa, literally being at his feet in a lucid dream and asking him very pointed, specific questions, is clearly as I'm talking to Lisa on this broadcast, and receiving answers. And now, whether is that truly the Karmapa entering my dream and giving me this guidance, or is it in fact a deeper layer of my own heart mind arising in the form of the Karmapa? I honestly can't say, but I do know that that process is certainly available to us. And making that differentiation is an extremely subtle question that perhaps you can answer for yourself when you dive in and establish a more perhaps heightened awareness to these types of experiences within yourself. But lovely question. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. If you're just joining us here with Andrew Holecek, learning about his upcoming course, Tibetan Dream Yoga, which begins Monday, December 4th. And you can log on to dreamyogacourse.com for all the details and to register. And let's get back to these great questions here. This one is from Lynn, who says, is it possible to drink occasionally or smoke a bit of marijuana and still have lucid dreams? Will those substances help or hinder the experience of lucid dreaming?
Sure. Big question in Colorado these days with our legalized marijuana laws. Um, any dream, any dream can be used for the triggering of lucidity. And this is what differs lucid dreaming, dream yoga from classic dream interpretation, which I have a tremendous fondness for, allegiance, and lifelong study of. But these lucid dreaming, dream yoga, sleep yoga, the nocturnal practices have a different bandwidth of applicability. They're not so much interested in interpretation, even though that's an extremely viable way to work with the dreamscape. But the fundamental point here is that any dream can be used for the purposes of lucidity. You can wake up within it. And with that said, the psychotropic agents, whether it's marijuana or a more kind of sedative agent, you could say like alcohol, less than ideal. And I think your own experience probably bears this out. It tends to sedate the mind, which is one reason, at least initially, which is one reason why you can use alcohol to go to sleep. But it tends to have a somewhat negative rebound effect, waking you up in the middle of the night. And so generally, if I'm trying to really, I'm in retreat, obviously, or I'm really trying to crank up my lucid dreaming, I definitely stay away from all these types of agents because I trust the natural kind of health and beauty of my own mind. And these other agents, sure, I use them for recreation, they're fun, but they're not, in my approach and my understanding, my own training, they're not particularly helpful for bringing about lucidity in this specific sense and in a larger sense. And I think if you drink too much or you smoke too much, it tends to narcotize the mind. It tends to make the mind, you could say, more non-lucid. At least that's my experience. Yours may be otherwise. But as a classic rule in what's called good sleep hygiene, and we talk a lot about this in the course, what does it mean to practice good sleep hygiene? alcohol is something you want to avoid if you really want to engage in these practices with some rigor. But again, geez, you don't have to do these things every night. I enjoy a glass of wine or a beer as much as anybody. It's just that I'm a little bit aware of the effects of what these agents can do in my own experience. But we're all different. These practices are not a one-size-fits-all practice. We all have our own quirks, our idiosyncrasies, and for some persons, for some people, maybe these agents can help them. But I think generally, statistically, they don't seem to do so.
Okay, great. I'm sure plenty of people wanted to know the answer to that one, so thank you for that. Um, we have a question here from Paula, who says, when you dream that you're in a city that you haven't been in this life, but this
Mhm.
episode is repetitive and you can identify the streets and the whole city, is this city part of your imagination, or is it coming from a past life episode, or what?
Yeah, again, it's another great one. Yes, 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 and who knows for sure? But again, the reason some of these statements may seem incredulous or even outrageous from a Western perspective, especially Western scientific perspective, which would categorically dismiss these types of experiences, it's because most of us in the West, and I think the audience here is probably an exception to that, have a very myopic, nearsighted, restricted view of mind and reality. We shrink everything down to the brain, we shrink everything down to this body, a kind of a flatland reductionist approach, which I personally find very uninspiring. And so, even though I'm a long-time, lifelong student of science, I love the wisdom, the knowledge brought from the Western scientific traditions. I also realize the great limitations. And so, from Eastern perspectives, yes, indeed, when the mind relaxes and opens into these very, very deep strata, and also, specifically what's called the substrate mind, this level of mind that is deep within us is not limited to space and time. It's pretemporal, it's pre-spatial. I completely would agree that this is what we would dip into when we have certain deja vu experiences. And then there's no reason whatsoever, especially if you believe in doctrines like rebirth, that these deeper strata of the mind can, in fact, be stamped by imprints from previous incarnations. And in that case, then sure, it's not a mystery at all that these particular types of experiences can re-arise in the mind stream of this particular form. And it certainly fits into my worldview. And so obviously I can't speak with authority about your particular experience, saying, yeah, for sure, that's coming from a previous incarnation. That's something that's out of my scope of ability. But in my understanding of the nature of mind and reality, we have access to these deeper, more beautiful, more mysterious kind of bandwidths of experience that to me make this world so much more beautiful, so much more rich and wondrous. And so, yeah, I mean, why not? I mean, really, why not?
Okay, great. Thank you. I got a question from Matthew, and actually, there's more than one person asking these things, so let's just use his to encapsulate it. Matthew wants
Cool.
to know, can you address both sleepwalking and flying dreams? What are these phenomena?
Uh, okay, so again, if I'm hearing this properly, sleepwalking takes place, and I'm assuming Matthew's saying sleepwalking. You're not in a lucid dream. You're literally sleepwalking in the way people talk about it. This takes place in non-REM sleep, because again, if you're in REM sleep, and unless you're afflicted with REM behavioral sleep disorder, your body is paralyzed. So these things generally occur in non-REM sleep, and they're not at all uncommon. And there's some incredibly interesting literature on this that I can refer to in the course. Some really interesting books that talk about not only sleep walking, but driving in your sleep, having sex in your sleep, which I had to insert that. Um, Leading, what do they call it? They call it sexomnia leading to snorgasm, which also could make a host of really interesting jokes about your lover. So I'll leave that one for what it is. But yeah, when in non-REM sleep, You can sleep talk, you can sleepwalk. And the really interesting kind of metaphorical um, application here is that according to the wisdom traditions, we are sleepwalking, what we consider our so-called waking state. If we see it dualistically, if we see it as solid, lasting, and independent, we're sleepwalking. So we can use the example of classic sleepwalking as a way to possibly glean some level of understanding that perhaps we, unbeknownst to us in our deep non-lucidity, we're actually sleepwalking right now. Now, the other question, if I understand it, is, and this is flying dreams, they're extraordinarily common. And in fact, in my cartography, my listing of the 9 stages of dream yoga, I put it as my first stage just because it is so common. And this is my personal theory on this. I have not read this elsewhere, but it makes a great deal of sense to me in my understanding of the physiology of the subtle body, which we talk about in this course. The subtle body is what supports the dreaming subtle mind. What actually lifts, and we talk about this in the course, what actually lifts the mind, lifts consciousness out of the deep dreamless state, which is where the consciousness is temporarily abiding in the heart center, according to these descriptions of the nocturnal kind of trajectory. What brings the mind from the dreamless state into the dream state is, in fact, a movement of wind, this subtle prana, lung, qi. You've heard these terms, I'm sure, that actually lifts these subtle, they're called bindus or mind pearls. We talk about this in the course when we talk about the inner yogas that support dream yoga. They lift the consciousness from the heart to the throat center, which according to these inner yogic systems is where consciousness temporarily abides physiologically when we're dreaming. And so to me, it would make a great deal of sense that if in fact that is the case, and my experience with these inner practices has borne this out, that as the winds lift us up from the deep dreamless state into the dream, then in a very real way, we can just continue this kind of airborne projection, so to speak, and continue into flight. And so I, like you, I mean, I have had thousands of dreams where I'm flying in my dream, and I have sensitized myself to that fact. This is where we work with dream signs. So by becoming familiar with the fact that, hey, I can use this experience of repetitive flight in my dreams to actually clue myself into the fact that I am dreaming. And so instead of just getting, pardon the play on words, getting blown away by the winds as they hurl us into a dream of flight that's usually non-lucid, with some sensitization to dream signs, we can use our sense of flight saying, hey, wait a second, I can't do this in waking reality. I must be dreaming. And then so in that micro instant of awareness or lucidity or recognition, we can transform a non-lucid dream into a lucid dream on the spot. So use your flight dreams to fly you into the lucid state.
Fascinating. Wow, thanks. Looking at the clock here, we have time for a few more questions, but before we take those, I want to give a few details about the course itself. People are asking for that type of information. This is going to be a really fascinating 7-week journey under Andrew's expert guidance, where you'll supercharge your visualization and manifestation abilities by harnessing the power of nocturnal meditation to expand your consciousness around the clock. And the 7-week course takes place on Mondays at noon Pacific, starting Monday, December 4th. And if for any reason you can't join us live, that's fine. You won't miss the teachings. You will receive audio and video recordings, transcripts, and all course handouts on your course homepage. And also, I'd like to remind you that we offer a no-risk money-back guarantee on all of our courses, giving a full 2 weeks until December 18th in this case, to make sure that you absolutely love it. I'm sure you will. It's already fun just talking about it here. And as an added option, all participants are welcome to connect in a private Facebook community group so you can stay connected with one another and communicate with Andrew between the classes. And also, everyone who registers receives the Tibetan Dream Yoga bonus collection. First, you'll receive an audio teaching from Andrew called Dream Yoga and the Daytime Practice of Illusory Form. Next, you'll get an ebook excerpt from Andrew entitled The Non-Lucid View, What Keeps Us in the Dark. Next, you'll get another ebook excerpt, this one called How to Meditate, a Detailed Explanation. And you'll get one more ebook excerpt entitled Meditation and the Practice of Lucidity, What It Is and Is Not. And when you register by midnight Pacific on Wednesday, November 29th, you receive an additional bonus gift. You'll get an audio teaching from Andrew entitled Lucidity and the Psychology of Illusion. So before we get back into the questions, Andrew, what are you most looking forward to sharing in your upcoming course?
Oh, yeah. Lisa, I guess there's so much to share. For me, my passion with these practices that I've engaged in really for some like 40 years at this point is really introducing people to their potentiality, that we each reside on top of this vast natural resource, the wealth of our own mind, our unconscious mind, and then at the deepest level, these kind of superconscious levels of mind. And so my great delight is to introduce people, you could almost say, into deeper aspects of themselves, the deeper aspects of their own heart mind that really are revealed to us, whether we know it or not, every night when we sleep and dream. And so if we simply bring a flashlight into the dark, which is what this program is designed to do, we can illuminate facets of this unconscious mind, bring them into the light of awareness, liberate them within that awareness, and find ourselves living not only in the darkness of the night in a new way, but most directly using these practices to transform the day. And this cannot be overstated. And this is, again, a very big difference between lucid dreaming and dream yoga, is that dream yoga and the other nocturnal practices, lucid dreaming at this level leads to lucid living. It's what, the scientists use this fancy term called bidirectionality. That, what we do at night affects what happens when we sleep and dream. What we do when we sleep and dream, especially if we engage in these practices, most definitely affects what we do during the day. So what we do is we use this two-way street, and that's what we're trying to do, is open up communication between conscious and unconscious processes. We can use the night to transform the day. We can use the day to transform the night. And then in so doing, we start to really change the way we look at both states. And it's so exciting to me to share that with people because, again, most people don't know that we have these opportunities every single night when we go to sleep. They're usually lost in the oblivion of non-lucidity, but it's like entering night school or adding a night shift to your life. We can enter, in a certain sense, extend our lives by living longer consciously in these states and have the insights that we glean from the night transform our waking state. So that's what really gets me excited.
Awesome. Well, I personally can't wait. But let's get back to the questions here.
Cool.
Alexandra has a great question here. They're all great, but this one is probably one a lot of people are wondering. How does one even begin to become aware in their dreams that they're dreaming?
Yeah. Well, that's what we spend a heap of time doing. And we do so really, as I suggested at the outset, with this very brief meditation. And that's why there's so much of this course is looking at meditation in a new way. Um, and the reason for this, and this is how we can use the day to wake up to the night. If you want to start waking up to your dreams at night, start waking up to the contents of your mind during the day. And so what this suggests is that the daily practice of meditation that I will get into in the very first module, that a large part of the bonus material is about, meditation is the daily practice of lucidity. Countless studies have shown that meditators have more lucid dreams. For a meditation master, all their dreams are lucid. And so, one way to look at this is that thoughts are to waking consciousness as dreams are to dreaming consciousness. And some studies have shown, this is such a compelling fact to me, that in the untrained mind, something like 95% at least of what we experience goes by non-lucidly. In other words, we're aware of less than 1 to 5%, depending on the study, of what takes place in our mind. And you only have to sit in meditation to be aware of this, or not aware of it. That we've got the big screen of activity in our mind when we're meditating, but yet underneath it is the CNN crawler, subconscious gossip that's taking place. Underneath that is yet another wave of distraction. And so we're non-lucid at night because we're non-lucid during the day. And this cannot be overstated. And so using this tenet of bidirectionality, which sounds complicated, but it's so simple, it's so obvious, You start meditating during the day and you wake up to the contents of your mind during the day, you become more lucid to the contents of your mind now. You will become more lucid to the contents of your mind as you sleep and dream. It's like the great poet Kabir once said of death, also applies to sleep and dream. What is found then is found now. Or in this case, what is not found now is not found then. So you wake up to your mind now in meditation, and I promise you, there's no mystery here. This is pure kind of physiology, causality. You become more conscious of the contents of your mind now. You will start to recognize those contents when they manifest in sleep and dream. So that's what I call the super technique. And then within that, there's a whole battery of practices that we introduced. It's a large part of this course. All the tips and tricks, from gadgets to herbal supplements to diet, all the ways that we can, as I talk about in the course, reconstruct the lost temple of sleep so that these dreams become a natural consequence of these types of activities. And so a large part of the course is, in fact, answering this exact question, understanding what has made us so non-lucid, and then understanding what we can do in a large kind of holistic way to become lucid. So it's a super question in terms of what we're going to largely be discussing in this course. So thanks for that segue. Great.
Okay, thank you. We've got a couple questions. So let me just sort of capsulize. People are wondering
Totally.
about communicating with, I guess, dead relatives or loved ones, people who are on the other side. First of all, is it possible? And how do you know if it's really them? It's kind of like the question you answered earlier about how can you tell if it's really the Buddha?
Yeah, that's the second part is obviously extremely difficult to answer. And again, very similar to the question about whether it's Buddha or Tara or your deceased relative. There is a place for this type of experience within these descriptions of mind. But with that said, I also think that, and again, I don't think there's anybody who can definitively answer these questions for you. I think it's just understanding kind of the mechanics and the processes, and then maybe, finding out for yourself. But I also very strongly believe that a large part of what manifests after someone who has died in our dreams as visitation dreams, I would probably argue that a great deal of this is our own unconscious processes manifesting in the form of a dream, our own longing, our own grief. And parenthetically, I'll talk about this, I believe, in the second module. I will talk about how you can, in fact, process grief in a dream. Because as I mentioned, I believe in my conversation with Stephen, death is the end of a body. It's not the end of a relationship. So you can definitely work out unresolved issues with those who have died in your dream state. So this is an extremely difficult question to answer for sure. But like the previous one, I think that, yes, my understanding is you can have these types of dreams. Perhaps there might be a more charged component, if, in my own experience, if I was to differentiate between what I believe to be my own unconscious aspects arising, visitations from my deceased parents, for instance, and whether they actually have that power. I think there would probably be an experience of increased charge, like what we call sometimes a hyperlucid dream, where these dreams are so extraordinarily real that they seem to deliver a particular type of oomph. But in the Buddhist description of mind, there does seem to be, and again, this is just the Buddhist way of relating to it, there does seem to be a kind of statute of limitation, so to speak, as to how available these people who have transitioned, how available their mind stream can be in affecting ours. It seems to be a kind of expiration date to that sort of thing. So it definitely seems possible to me. My experience has borne this out with loved ones that I have lost. And making a very specific, definitive answer, I think, should be done with extreme caution because it's very, very difficult to assess that directly from the outside. I think from your own experience, if it comes in with more clarity, with oomph, with charge, hyperlucidity, then that could in fact suggest this type of so-called visitation.
Okay, great, thank you. Let's go to a question from Jan, who says, "Won't lucid dreaming sap you of restful and deep sleep? It might make you drained of energy the next day."
No, not at all. Not at all, Jan, because most of the restorative sleep, and again, this is why it's so helpful to understand the stages of sleep, which we do, I think, in module 3, perhaps. We go through the 5 stages of sleep that we go through, the great contribution of the West. And most of our restorative sleep takes place in the early stages of the night. And so unless you're engaging in sleep yoga, which I introduced but is not the purview of this course, you don't touch the first part of the night. That's mostly non-REM sleep. That's deep restorative sleep. Growth hormone is released. All the physiological restorative reparative processes take place. We don't mess with that. We engage in the practice of dream yoga with what's called prime time dream time, which is roughly an hour and a half, 2 hours or so before we normally wake up. That's when we transition from non-REM or deep restorative delta sleep back to highly brain-waved, energetic states associated with rapid eye movement or dreaming. And during this state, your mind is active already. Your mind is already cooking with dreams. And so waking up, and I can tell you from personal experience, I mean, I've done this for decades. I can have lucid dreams that last up to an hour. And honestly, I wake up more energized, more refreshed. I mean, I'm dreaming anyway. My brain is actively involved in the dream. If I bring lucidity and awareness to it, it definitely does not tap me out. I'm just aware of it. And usually I'm so psyched after the fact that it energizes me for the day. So this is really important to understand. It definitely does not tap you out. We don't mess with the first first 4 or 5 phases of these sleep cycles, which occur in about 90-minute periods. We concentrate in primetime dream time when dreams are cooking anyway. We're mostly in REM sleep. And because of that, these practices, unless you're doing sleep yoga again, and that's not what we're doing in this course, these practices definitely do not tap out your rest.
Okay, great. And this is a unique one. It's fascinating. This is from Joy, who says, "Is it possible to develop a helpful tool or skill to use in a nightmare to deal with a negative encounter with a predatory character that is assaulting, abusing a victim, enabling you to do 2 things: to get the negative behavior of one character to stop and to comfort and heal the victim?"
Oh yeah, these questions are awesome. Yes, of course. And again, I'm just assuming by the context of this question that this nightmarish experience is taking place within the context of your own mind. So we're not talking about these possible so-called external visitations and the like. So with that said, as a basic parameter, for sure. I mean, you have to understand, and this I think is in I believe it's stage 5 of Dream Yoga, where we work actively I think it's stage 5. We work actively in this stage of trying to enter the dream body of another figure in our dreams, which of course is the practice of empathy and compassion. And so if we understand once again that when we're working with a dream, what are we really doing? I mean, we're working with the contents of our own mind as they're manifesting in the medium of the dream. And so in that case, with greater and greater degrees of lucidity, and nightmares only have power over us in direct proportion to how lucid they are. In other words, if you're non-lucid to a nightmarish experience, it becomes more and more terrifying because, again, you take it to be so bloody real. As you become lucid to it, you wake up to the fact that it's just a dream. The fear decreases proportionally and dramatically. And so these experiences can still continue, but with the degree of your lucidity, you can indeed kind of intercept a situation like this. You can engage at more sophisticated levels in a type of even psychological role playing that can take place here. They can bring about a healing for your own kind of rejected or disparate elements. So this is a really big question that has a lots of implications and kind of applications. And without having follow-up questions on my part to extract what's really being asked here, I think that in a nutshell, yeah, the more lucid you are, the more control you have, and the more you can work with these elements that seem in a non-lucid state to be independent and external. But when you wake up to that state, you realize, hey, this is just my unconscious mind playing out this way. Let's see what I can do with conscious intervention, not too dissimilar what happens in a psychotherapeutic session, to resolve this type of dissonance. And so I think you start to get some sense with these kind of questions of the vast potentiality that's available to us when the conscious mind enters previously unconscious domains and can start to transform these unconscious elements. So thanks for the platform to riff on that. Thank you.
Wow. Yeah. I'm looking at the clock here. This has just been a fascinating hour. We could talk for days. I want to thank our viewers for being with us and for all your terrific questions. Tibetan Dream Yoga starts Monday, December 4th. And again, you can visit dreamyogacourse.com to learn more and to register. So before we go, looking at the clock here, Andrew, do you have any final words for our listeners?
Um, yeah, I mean, just think about what you could do. We spend, if you live to be 90 years old, we spend 30 years in a state of consciousness that we know very little about, the sleep and dream state. Dreaming, about 25% of our time is in the dream state. That's about a month a year that is usually lost in the oblivion of non-lucid sleep. And so I love this idea of lucid dreaming, dream yoga as being a higher form of education, this kind of pedagogy of the future, as I refer to it, secondary form of education where we can enter this night school. I mean, think about what you could accomplish if you had an extra month a year, and not only if it was just kind of balanced time with what we accomplish in the waking state, but these teachings put forth that what we do with these tectonic plates of our experience in the Buddhist tantras, they assert that the meditations and practices we engage in the dream state, because they're so much more foundational, can be up to 9 times more transformative than what you do in the waking state. And so, really, if we understand the view, the potentiality, the resources of what these great wisdom traditions have been doing and putting forth for thousands of years that are now substantiated by Western science, with its great gift of skillful means for induction and the like, we have this incredible opportunity, kind of double-barreled East-West science and spirit opportunity to work with psychological and spiritual growth that just excites the beans out of me. And so my great delight in this program is to share my lifelong passion with listeners, to introduce them to their own natural resources so they can make these discoveries for themselves and realize just how profound and transformative they are. So I want to thank everybody for the opportunity. The questions today were just awesome. And if this is at all indicative of the level of conversation in the Q&A we'll have either live and also with the Facebook page, which I will be active with, I'm excited because this is really where the program comes alive for me, when I can engage very specifically with your questions, your requests, share in your collective wisdom. I mean, there's a lot of wisdom with these people that will be attending this program. And so that's what makes this particularly delightful to me. So thank you so much for spending this time with me. And I really look forward to spending these next 7 weeks with you. And until then, pleasant dreams.
All right. Wow. Well, thank you again, Andrew. It has just been wonderful talking to you today. And once again, I want to say thank you. I'm sorry, go ahead. I interrupted.
So much for moderating and for the great questions from everybody. It's been great fun.
It has been terrific fun. And once again, I want to thank you, everybody who joined us here today. And again, for those fantastic questions, because these are things I wanted to know too. On behalf of all of us at the Shift Network, I wish you well and look forward to having you on this course or perhaps another one in the future. Have a great day, everyone.